Ladies and gentlemen, it's Friday in some places. It looks like we made it. I hope everybody's having a beautiful evening, a beautiful day. I hope that you got to wake up in the arms of the person you love the most. I hope you realize a little miracle just waiting to happen to you as soon as you walk out that door. I got a great miracle for you in store today. The world of cannabis is knocking on my door. I have an incredible guest here. We're going to get into it. I want everyone to help me welcome and understand that it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Andy Mansfeld. He's a dynamic entrepreneur, a visionary leader at the forefront of healthcare innovation with a rich background as a physician. Dr. Andy's journey has been nothing short of remarkable. Having spent numerous years providing direct care to patients, he embarked on a transformative path into the business realm of medicine, leveraging his expertise in consulting and sales to drive meaningful change. Meaningful, ladies and gentlemen. I want to underscore that word. However, Dr. Andy's thirst for exploration and passion for discovery led him on a captivating detour to Vietnam, where he immersed himself in the vibrant craft beer scene, which we're going to talk about that a little bit, I hope, and expanding his horizons and embracing new opportunities. Now, back in Europe, Dr. Andy has redirected his focus to a groundbreaking frontier, medical cannabis. With a deep commitment to improving patient care and well-being, he is dedicated to harnessing the therapeutic potential of this remarkable plant, working tirelessly to ensure its benefits reach those in need. Please join me in welcoming the innovative Dr. Andy, a true pioneer in the intersection of medicine, entrepreneurship, and compassion. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Andy. How are you?
I'm doing great, George. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. It is indeed interesting times we live in, and I gave you a little bit of I just highlighted a few spots in your background. You have such a diverse background, and you've a wealth of knowledge in different areas, not only in different areas of expertise, but like different parts of the world, man. And I was kind of wondering maybe you could open up that background a little bit more. Like, who were you before you are the guy that you are today in working on medical cannabis? And what kind of really was there something that really got you going for this, or how did it come about?
Well, I think I've always been a proponent of legalization of cannabis and marijuana, just from a kind of a ethical background or a point of view, because I've never understood why um, this plant was being demonized while people are drinking. And back in the day, a lot more drinking and driving, and people are smoking cigarettes, but cannabis was not allowed, which never seemed to be quite as evil as the government made it out to be. Um, so that's going back a long ways. But then when I was a physician in Colorado, I was in Colorado and when the legalization happened there. And you started getting more and more information about how it definitely helps with chronic pain. So just from that point of view, it made sense, and then, we've seen a lot of other benefits, but that was always clear that it helped with chronic pain. So it never made sense why it was being, demonized all over the place.
Yeah, it's an interesting relationship the word medicine has, right? Like, you know, how do you define medicine? When I say the word medicine, how do you define that?
Oh, wow. Good question. I mean, in the end, it's anything that potentially helps someone. It doesn't necessarily have to heal. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
other doctors might not like that answer, but I mean, going back thousands of years, people were
Uh,
using plants originally, obviously, because that's all they had. That
yeah,
and and prayer or whatever the
yeah.
shamans and medicine people back then were calling it. But originally, it was using plants and different substances that were found in nature. You know. But modern medical studies, you look at does a medication work or not, a pill work, and then you have the placebo effect. But does a
Great way.
placebo effect not still have an effect? And it does. It doesn't mean that you can run around selling sugar pills and hope for
Right.
some placebo effect. But if someone is benefited by a placebo effect, they're still getting a benefit. So it's hard in the end to define, I think, medicine or medication as specifically something you can test in a test tube necessarily. Although cannabis THC can be proven to have certain benefits even in a test tube or in a laboratory, you know.
Yeah. You know, it brings into question this idea of medicine, and both of us are big fans of plant medicine. But in the Western world, it seems to me, especially with being on the heels of COVID, like we see illness as contagious. And when I start thinking about cannabis, starting in Colorado or starting being decriminalized, I know people hate that word, decriminalized, but legalized, whatever you want to say, it almost seems to me like wellness can be contagious. You start looking at these studies. Now more studies come out. It's almost like it gains momentum. What's your take on that? What's the take on wellness being contagious? Is that too crazy?
No, I mean, I think it's a very good point. I mean, not just things like cannabis or now psychedelics are
Yeah.
becoming in vogue and being researched
Yep.
for mental health things. But if you look at also fitness, dieting, all these different things that are all also wellness and health related, they also have kind of their contagiousness. If you grow up in an area of the world where everyone walks everywhere and bikes everywhere, then that's what you grow up knowing, and that's what you do. If you grow up in an area where you eat a lot of fast food and don't exercise much and sit in front of your computer gaming all day, and that's what all the people around you do, that's what you do. Doesn't make you a bad person, but it's just what you know and what you've been exposed to. And that's contagiousness, just like you described it. So I think certainly wellness and any behaviors can be considered contagious, sure. Or even moods, if you walk in a room and you're in a bad mood and everyone else is in a good mood, it can go one way or the other. Either you get in a good mood or they get in a bad mood. But, I mean, moods are definitely contagious. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. It makes me think of, if you throw a cold glass of water into a swimming pool, it doesn't take long before that cold water becomes the same temperature as the water in the swimming pool, right?
Right.
This is a pretty interesting one. I think that it's also sort of a bridge towards stigma. On some level, I remember being a young kid and being like, I'm going to smoke this joint and go over here, but I'd be super nervous because society looked down on it, and there's gotta be, I don't know if there's any tests on it, but there has to be some sort of effect in the individual when society looks down upon something, even if it's good for you, right? Like, I don't really hear that talked about too much. What's your take on that?
Well, certainly, the people who are using cannabis from a medical point of view are lumped in with the people who are using it recreationally. And I'm not saying anything wrong about the people who are using it recreationally, but that's where the stigma originally came from. And or not necessarily there. I guess it came from the
Reefer Madness.
The reefer madness. The government propaganda, which turned out it was all racist BS. Way back in the day.
Yeah.
But, the stigma comes from the recreational side more than the medical side. But if someone is using it to help with their chronic pain or whatever other issues, the public still looks at that person the same way because they don't know. It's not like someone walking around with a sign saying, "I'm using this for blah blah blah," disease state. So certainly, I think that affects people's, first of all, their ability to try it as a medication. And then certainly their ability to use it in an open manner. I mean, that being said, if someone's using edibles or tinctures or something, that's a lot more easy to take in public than if you're vaping or smoking. So, the method of delivery also makes a difference there in how people look at you, because if they don't notice it, they don't notice. So, I mean, certainly stigma is a big problem. But you also see there's a lot of reports. If you look at the acceptance in the US and then spreading around the world, once you have medical cannabis, medical marijuana in a place for a few years, the number of people who accept it goes up dramatically. And now in the US, the majority of people in the US, both conservatives and liberals, are in favor of medical cannabis. And you're starting to see big trends like that across Europe and a lot of other countries too in the world, South America and in particular also. So you're really seeing that trend, which as people accept it, the stigma goes down, although it doesn't disappear because someone can say, yes, I agree with medical cannabis, but when they see someone on the street smoking a joint, they're still going to give them the side eye, you know. So there's still a ways to go, but it's heading in the right direction, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. As someone who has spent time on both sides of the pond, is what's going on in Europe over there? I don't know. I pay attention a little bit over there, and I talk to people like Sebastian Martincolo, and maybe before I move on any further, let me just give a shout out to Mark Davis. Mark Davis is for people watching this show. If you don't know who Mark Davis is, you should Google him, because if you're in the world of cannabis and you don't know who Mark Davis is, you got a problem, because Mark Davis can help you find the person that you need to be next to. Shout out to Mark Davis. Mark, thank you for everything. You're an amazing human being. So, Andy, as someone who's been on both sides of the pond, and you've seen the trends, you've been over in Denver, you see what's going on, you have a relationship with medical cannabis, and now you're in Europe. What is it like over there? Is it the same rules? Is it different rules? Are different stigmas? Is it a different relationship? Maybe you can fill my audience in on what's it like over there with cannabis, medical cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's very similar to the U.S. because in Europe you have a lot of different countries. They all make their own laws, but they're all under most of the countries are under the EU, which has its own overriding laws. So it's similar to the U.S., where you have all the states with their own laws and regulations, and the federal government. So different countries here are starting to pass different laws. Almost every country, most countries in Europe have medical cannabis. Some it's more accessible than others. Some have laws saying medical cannabis is allowed, but it's impossible to access it. But Germany's had medical cannabis since 2017, and it's the biggest medical cannabis market in Europe. So that has, I think, also led to the drive here in Germany to have full legalization, which actually they're supposed to be voting in the law today for what's called the first pillar, where they're going to be allowing then home grows and cannabis social clubs, similar to what they have in Spain and Barcelona. But it won't be like a regulated adult use recreational market yet, but that's supposed to come at a later stage. But so it's very similar to the US. You have all these different countries. They all have different rules. It's very confusing for people. You can't transport from one country to the other, but some countries you can grow in and export to other countries. For instance, a lot of growing is happening in Portugal, and they can export to Germany for medical and research purposes, but not for recreational purposes. And the restriction on that commerce or that transport of recreational cannabis between countries is governed by EU and UN rules or laws. So that's almost akin to the federal situation in the US, where federal government says you can't have interstate commerce of cannabis because it's illegal on the federal level. Same here in Europe, because of the EU and UN rules, you can't sell, or it's not about selling, you can't even transport cannabis for recreational purposes. So the countries are trying to work within all these frameworks and doing their own things within their borders. So it's very similar to the US. It's a confusing patchwork of different rules and regulations that is difficult to keep track of. Yeah.
Man, it just sounds to me like there's a room full of heavyweights that are like, I get this cut, you get that cut. No. I get this cut, you get that cut. No. We're going to centralize this bad boy. And, it sounds to me like people are arguing about who's going to get paid and not really caring about the true benefits of what it can do to help people on some level, man. Wait, you have had an interesting career, and you have seen a lot of changes in cannabis. And I'm curious if you can maybe speak to some of the ideas that have changed in your mind about cannabis.
Well, I think one of the biggest is from a medical point of view. I mentioned chronic pain earlier, and I always saw that as an obvious area where medical cannabis can be helpful. Wasn't clear to me because we didn't have the studies how beneficial it would be, but now we're seing that a A lot of people are able to stop using opiates completely.
Mm,
When they're on massive doses, they're able to stop using opiates completely, able to function much better because they're not as um, knocked out. Opiates knock people out much worse than cannabis does. Um, so, seeing that and seeing the studies that prove that you can really treat pain very well with cannabis, even cannabis alone,
yeah.
was quite amazing to see. But now you're seeing that it's helpful in many other areas. Seizures, especially in children that are not controlled by other medications. That's something that we've seen movies and heard a lot of stories about, but there's a lot of evidence coming out about that also.
Yeah.
But the one that actually has surprised me is how helpful it is in mental health. There's a
Yeah.
lot of studies coming out that it is beneficial in mental health. My concern was that it might even be detrimental to people with mental health issues. But without studies, you never know. And so luckily, over the last years, you've had a lot more medical research coming out, which is really starting to show what it can and can't do. And that was one of the big problems with the
Yeah.
prohibition was that you couldn't do any research. And then you had big pharma who was also pushing, don't legalize it because we're going to lose money.
Yeah.
Don't fund research because we're going to lose money. Like you said, not trying to help the people, just trying to watch their pocketbook. But now, there's thousands and thousands of studies coming out in the last few years that are just focused on cannabis and what it can and can't do.
Yeah. I too am blown away by the way in which plant medicine is able to help people with mental health problems. If you're like me, you have a copy of the DSM and you'll flip through it sometimes and be like, this is all bullshit. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? You start looking through there and you're like, I'm like, this is all hypothetical, man. And a big dose of psychedelics or even cannabis at the right time, at the right dosage, it really changes your perspective on things. And for someone who has gone through bouts of depression at times or face some mania here and there, it seems to me that plant medicine gives you a different perspective. And it's with that different perspective that you can maybe understand why you're in constant pain. Like, you know what? You know what this constant pain is? It's this unwillingness to confront this problem in my life that I've had since I was 5, and it's now manifesting in ways that are physical. And
Right.
so it's connected on some level like that. And I really think that is a giant step forward for medicine to thoroughly understand or begin to understand the mind body connection and pain and suffering and all these things. And I think cannabis goes a long way in helping people figure that kind of stuff out. Do you think that that's a big part of the mental wellness effects that cannabis can have on people?
I'm not sure about cannabis. I mean, like I said, I mean, I believe that studies are showing it's definitely helpful
Right.
for mental health, different mental health issues. I'm not sure how cannabis plays into those.
Okay.
I mean, I think for anxiety and some things like
Mm,
that, it's a little bit more obvious, but others, I'm not sure. I think the psychedelics are to me make a little bit more sense in the form of like for PTSD and major depression that's refractory to treatment and all these different things. They talk about it being kind of a reset that
yeah.
psychedelic medicine gives some kind of a reset for the brain. I think that goes to what you were saying, kind of opens up the person's brain to see things in a different light and reach to areas, whether it be past traumas or whatever it may be, but it kind of opens up their brain a little bit, their mind a little bit to see different things or to be able to understand different things or access different things. I think that's where the psychedelics really are seeming to work on those really difficult problems. I don't know
Yeah.
if cannabis works in the same way though. I just don't know. I'm not sure what the mechanism there is. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see, because I know when you ingest cannabis, it forms a different molecule than the I don't know enough to quote you exactly what's happening when it gets broken down in the liver, but I think it's a different type of cannabinoid that happens. There's something that different that happens when you ingest it versus when you smoke it. And I think that it's more psychedelic when you take it in and you eat it on some level. It would be an interesting study to see the way in which THC, the terpenes, affect the default mode network in the brain. Like, is it doing something similar to psychedelics? Because you could put up the neural feedback and probably at least get a map and kind of see that stuff. Are you aware of any kind of studies that have been happening with cannabis and like neural feedback or any studies in that area?
I'm not aware of any. I'm sure there's some research
Yeah,
going on there, but I mean, I'm not aware of them. But I think the big part of the problem also is we don't really understand everything that's happening, whether it be
yeah,
with psychedelics, but I think more so with cannabis because of all the terpenes and alkaloids and all these other things that are that are in the plant, and which are leading to the entourage effect, which is
yeah,
real, but we there's so many different combinations. There's millions of different types of combinations where, you've got dozens and dozens of terpenes and alkaloids and all these different things that are in different levels. And at one level will have this effect, at a different level, a different one, and how they interact with the other compounds. It's so complex that,
yep,
I mean, I think in the end, maybe supercomputers and AI will help us maybe figure some of it out. But I think it's the different number of permutations of things combining and affecting each other are too large for our human brains to be able to comprehend.
yeah,
I mean, we know some basics about these terpenes will have these general effects and these have these general effects, kind of thing. But what if one's in a high dose and one's also in a high dose? Maybe they interact then differently, and we see that with certain compounds. At a high dose, it causes anxiety. At a low dose, it causes euphoria and different things like that. So it's just so complex that I don't know how we can figure that out, literally.
isn't that the whole problem with medicine? Like, I mean, if you can't measure all the variables, how the hell are you supposed to get the answer? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
It's kind of
with
crazy.
cannabis, that's the problem. That
Yeah,
is one of the problems. Medicine has tried to, or the government has tried to say, well, you can only leave. At first, they're like, you can take THC, either make it by extraction and distill it down to where it's only THC, or create a fake THC, and that you can sell, but you can't sell the real original version, which comes from the plant with the terpenes and everything else combined. And then it didn't work as well, you know. Um, and it comes from medicine wanting to be precise, but if the end effect is not as useful, then it's not really useful. Just because that way we can control it better. I mean, that doesn't make sense
yeah,
either.
yeah. I was speaking not too long ago with Professor Erica Dick in Canada, and she was telling me about, you know, it seems like there was a previous wave of psychedelics in the late 50s and in cannabis as well in the late 50s moving into the 60s where things were still kind of put up in this medical container. And she was speaking about some of the doctors that were doing some studies, and she had mentioned to me that some of the questionnaires were much they were a lot more willing to look at subjective effects. And one of the questions that they would ask the people that were going through treatment on psychedelics, what they would ask the family, particularly the wives, like, is your husband less of an asshole? And it seems to me like that particular type of questioning is kind of moved out of the way for being imprecise but the subjective ideas I think are measurable, whether it's the tears of the people that love you, seeing you getting better, or the relationships that someone could honestly say, like, wow, this person is really opening up, or my kid's talking to me again, like those are real effects. I mean, I'm hopeful. Do you think that that's something that, or is that being looked at again, or is that something that we could help inject back into the system to help maybe move the ball forward? Or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think traditional medicine has already been looking at things like
Good.
it's called quality of life and quality of life measurements. You
Nice.
know, and they for a long time that was missing, but I mean it's been being looked at more and more over the last couple of decades, for sure. And yeah, it's the common phrase is quality of life, but it is hard to measure those things, and that's where research studies, medical studies, have always struggled. How do you measure subjective things to try and get numbers and figures and data that you can actually use, especially from one study to the next? If everyone says I feel better, well, what does that mean? You know, another good example is pain. How do you measure pain? And that's always been a conundrum for researchers, because people say, well, it hurts less. Scale of 1 to 10, and still people don't know until you've been at a 10. A 4 feels like a 10 if you've never been above a 4. So that's the problem with quality of life stuff. It's hard to measure.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and does it seem to you that we are in a crisis of mental health? Like when I spend a lot of time in this field talking to different experts and different coaches and people with PTSD and some veterans groups, and I keep hearing this word, like we're in an epidemic of mental health. What's your take on that?
No, I'd say definitely we have been for probably 40, 50 years at least. I mean, before then, I think it was just shut up and suck it up and don't say anything. And that counted for both men and women, and you were taught it as a child. I think, especially in the U.S., but you also see it here in Europe, but not to the same extent as in the U.S. A large part of that epidemic of mental health crisis comes from the fact that it's not being treated or paid for by the government or by healthcare systems, or even by insurance companies in the U.S. So, people are finally allowed to, in a healthy, or allowed to express that they have mental health issues and need some help. Or even if they don't say they need help, it's obvious that they do, and there's no one to help them. So that's, I think, it's an unfortunate thing. You've allowed people to express their needs and to share their emotions, and then they're told, "Good job. Glad you're in touch with your needs. Now go sit in the corner and suffer alone because no one's going to help you." It's rather unfair. I think it's something that's very solvable. It just takes some time and effort and money from the governments to say this needs to be treated like what it is, which is a medical condition, but it's just not being done because, once again, money, and it's cheaper, and the politicians think it's cheaper to ignore it, but in the end, it costs more. Just like in all other medical issues, if you don't take care of them early, they cost more later.
Yeah. Do you ever think that that's not a bug, it's a feature? It seems to me interesting that when we look at addiction, isn't it interesting that sometimes you look at business, like Xerox, for example, they'll give you the printer for almost free, but you want some toner? Hey, the first one's free, but after that, you're going to buy it. You know what I mean? It's almost like this model of addiction has been commercialized. But when I see some of my friends that maybe I had a heroin addiction, now they're on Suboxone. It's like they traded this street drug for this pharmaceutical, but you still got to take it, and the mentality that comes with it too, like you can never touch another drug because you're a drug addict. It's almost like pulling them back into the world of addiction on some level.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in a little aside, now there's some, cannabis was always called the gateway drug, which has been proven in multiple studies not to be the case. But now there's some research coming out suggesting that it's actually the gateway out of addiction.
Wow, that's so awesome. What?
Yeah. So, and not saying that if someone has a drug addiction, they should add cannabis to the mix. I mean, that should be done probably in conjunction with a therapist or someone else with some kind of expertise. But there is some research coming out suggesting that it's actually helping people get cleaner.
That's brilliant.
But addiction is such a complicated thing. Some people, or take the more common things that everyone knows, cigarettes and alcohol. Some people drink too much in college, and then later they can have a healthy relationship with alcohol. Other people can't.
Yep.
Some people are able to just smoke a few cigarettes a week or one or two a day and still be, which is still not great for you, but it's better than a pack a day, And other people,
Yeah.
they're going to smoke a pack or two a day. So, same goes with other drugs. I mean, there's not many recreational heroin users, but there are some.
Yeah,
Doesn't make
totally.
sense to me, but but okay, they're all it's a big spectrum for everything, and same for
Yeah.
drug addiction and people who use drugs. But certainly, any help that can be found for people who are in the really dark corners of addiction. I mean, it's great that there's some help for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting to get to hear that. Like my mind is racing. Like there's I can't wait to start reading some of that stuff as cannabis is a gateway out of addiction. It makes so much sense. And like I know so many people that you look at the old school the Bill Wilson model of AA and everyone's smoking cigarettes, you know what I mean? Like it's just like you still got a drug in your hand. Why do you mean you can't do drugs? It's so crazy to me to think on a and I'm not trying to make light of it. Like I have nothing but huge respect for people that have made it through different programs and are able to keep their sobriety on a level. And I realize how important it is. I have lots of friends that have done it. I'm super proud of them. It's it's just interesting to think our relationship with the word drug. It's a weird thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting. But just go back to what you were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah,
The people who trade one addiction for another, the cigarettes, they
yeah,
start smoking a pack or two a day when they're going through AA. And AA or just addiction in general has a term for that. That's a dry drunk. It's someone
oh,
who is dry, who isn't drinking, but they still have all the same issues or mannerisms or behaviors that they had when they were drinking. They're just not drunk now. And it comes from not really doing the work to
yep,
understand where that
yep,
addiction and those behaviors are coming from, which goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, where some of the psychedelics help people delve into their inner being to figure out what is causing them to act so recklessly and destructively. Um, and once people are able to do that work, usually they're able to move on a little bit easier. Doesn't
yeah,
mean they still struggle with wanting to have a drink or use or whatever, but it's a little bit easier when you understand where all your behaviors and triggers are coming from instead of just being powerless and throwing your hands up in the air and saying, why am I feeling this way? Um, yeah, so I think that's really important. Sorry, now I forgot what you were asking.
man. I know it's brilliant. I love where you're going. I on some level, I think we are walking down the path of a more holistic approach to medicine, right? It seems like that when we start talking about things being connected and behaviors and symptomatic issues and language, like I think you're starting to build out a better picture of really what's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was in medical school a number of years ago, there was already a lot of talk about mind and body
Mm-hmm.
interconnecting, but it was still not, I would say, necessarily completely mainstream. And um, it depends on the physician you're talking to. Also, a
Yep.
surgeon, he's going to cut, and that's what he's there to do.
Yeah.
If you're talking to a doctor who specializes in arthritis, they're going to be looking more at the clinical picture. But if you're talking to your family physician or GP, that's where you're more likely to find someone who's going to say, yeah, mind, body, there is a connection. They're very important. It's important to look at both. But in the US and in Europe, the doctor doesn't have time to sit here with you in each visit for 15, 20,
Yeah.
30 minutes to
Yep.
discuss all the aspects of what's going on in your life and, what's happening in your relationship at home with your wife and your kids and your parents and your siblings and, building this big picture to understand
Yeah.
what's going on. I mean, patients don't even have time for that, really, for the time that it
Yeah.
takes. So, um, I mean, it's good that medicine is becoming more open to the connection between mind and body, but there's just not time for it in the modern world. Or even if there is time, who's going to pay for it? Because the physician has to, make money so that they can
Yep.
pay their staff and pay themselves a salary and put food on their own table. And insurance isn't going to pay anyone for an hour to sit there and talk about feelings, unfortunately. You know.
Is it this like I have Kaiser and I go to Kaiser, like my doctor's on a timer, man. He's got like, what up, George? How's it going? Boom, 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 boom. And I can see this. I can see the love in his eyes. Like he wants to talk to me more. And like so me and him will have a conversation and be like, I gotta go, George. I love you. I gotta go. Is it the same? I don't thoroughly understand the whole medical model or anything like that, and I'm new to it. Is it the same in Europe as it is in America? In America, we hear we have the greatest model ever, but I don't know. Is it different in Europe? What are some similarities and some differences that you think are happening there?
I mean, it's very similar. So, if you look at studies, many physicians in the U.S. are not happy with their careers
Yeah.
and
Yep.
and wouldn't do it again. Don't want their kids to do it.
Oh,
Don't want to do it themselves. And it's because of these time pressures and financial pressures, and they don't really get to do what they want to do, which is take the time to really spend time with their patients and figure out what's going on. It's more about the conveyor belt. And it's very similar in Europe. Definitely in Germany. I know I have a lot of friends who are physicians here. I know physicians in the UK, and both countries is very, very similar, and it's exact same complaints. So what's better here, though, is you really don't have the problem of massive numbers of people without insurance, and that makes a big difference. You know, in the U.S., there's tens of millions of people without insurance who get zero benefit or zero help, just about, unless they happen to be lucky. In Denver, they have Denver Health, which takes care of all the uninsured and underinsured people, but just within Denver proper. If you're on the wrong zip code or in the wrong zip code, you can't go to Denver Health, and then you're just out of luck. And there are some other clinics and stuff that could try and fill in, but they don't have enough resources. So, in the U.S., that's the big problem, that you just don't have access for tens of millions of people. But both sides of the pond, physicians aren't happy because they can't spend the time that they want with their patients. And then the patients aren't happy. It's just not the best system. And it's because you're trying to squeeze every dollar out of the system.
Yeah, it's hard to get blood from a rock.
Right. And in the U.S., it's much worse, though. The U.S., the government could easily pay, or the health system, there's enough money in it to pay for everyone to have health care. But the problem in the U.S. is that you've got the insurance companies who pull out probably $5 to $10 billion a quarter in profit out of the healthcare system. You don't have that as much in Europe. Of course, you've got insurance companies who are pulling money out, but not to the extent that they are in the U.S. When the congressional what's it called, the Congressional Budget Office, I think is what's called, or whatever it's called, looked at it. They said, it'll cost trillions of dollars to have universal health care in the U.S. But what people ignored was the savings that it would actually pay for itself and be cheaper than what's currently going on in the U.S. in the long run. So people saw the first sentence but didn't read the rest of the last few, basically. And it comes down to, if you have universal government health care coverage in the U.S., the insurance companies aren't pulling all the profit out and putting it in the pockets of a few investors and their CEOs making $100 million a year or whatever they pull in.
Man, corruption. When I heard a good quote that said something along the lines of, when the instrument becomes institutionalized, it loses its ability to cut. And like it just makes so much sense. Like when you have this instrument that works and then you turn it into an institution. I get insurance, but geez Louise, man, like when you start peeling back the layer, it's like, what happened? But I don't know. It's what brought you to, maybe we can hear about your journey, man. You were in Denver. Well, I know that much. And then now you're over here in Europe. Like, what happened, man? What do you did you go out there for cannabis? Did you go to Vietnam first, or what? What's the story there?
Yeah, so I mean, first I went to Vietnam. So a friend was opening up a craft brewery there and wanted me to help with that process, and so I was kind of like, what the hell? Why not? Sounds fun and interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so I went there for about 4 years, but then that was when COVID hit. Also,
Mm,
Vietnam shut their borders at the beginning of COVID completely. So within the country, you had very little COVID, and things were you were pretty free within the country, but there was no one coming in, and so tourism went from millions of visitors to zero overnight,
mm,
which put a big was a big issue for anyone involved in food and
yep.
beverage and stuff. I mean, obviously, so. Um, uh, I decided at some point that it was time to go ahead and move on. My plan was never to stay there extremely long term. I was thinking a couple of years, turned into 4 years. Very happy with those 4 years. So not complaining that I was there longer than my original intention, which was also very vague anyway. So it was very open ended. But I've been coming to Berlin since 1990, since the wall came down, and we've always liked Berlin, and so decided to move here and was looking at the kind of following what was happening with the cannabis industry
Yeah.
here, and with having seen everything in Colorado, I thought it'd be interesting to explore this industry here a little bit more. And Actually first got involved with the cultivation project, and that's when I realized how there was a real need for a cannabis specific jobs platform, because it's extremely
Mm,
difficult to find workers who are interested in the cannabis space or in the cannabis industry. So that's where I came up with the idea for EU Canada jobs, and started working on that alongside as I was working on the cultivation project, which in the end um, it didn't work out due to funding, but yeah, kept working on my EU Canada jobs project.
yeah.
That was my primary focus at that point. And that's going well. And definitely getting a lot of good feedback from industry and individuals alike that they're happy to see something like this that they can turn to help when they're looking for workers, or when workers are looking for places to work. Um, so it's working out great.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell us a little bit more about it. Is it? It's like an Indeed for people with weed. A weed. Well, I forgot how the.
Exactly.
That's the wrong
Weed.
way you say it.
And that'd be a good name for it, in weed.
Yeah.
Indeed probably wouldn't be very happy with that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
It's interesting
so
though, because there's tons of people looking to break that have a passion for it, that have gone to school for it nowadays, and understand cultivating and understand, especially it seems like Canada and a few spots in the US are some pretty hot spots. How does it work, man? Maybe tell us all about it. How does it work?
yeah, so we do two different things. We have our jobs platform, which is like you said, exactly
Okay.
like Indeed. You go on and you can search through jobs. Companies can create a profile and start just posting jobs right away on their own, or they can contact us and we help them.
Yeah.
But so the jobs platform is like an Indeed for weed, exactly. And then we also do recruiting, where like typical recruiting, we go out and we help. A company comes to us, say we need a head of sales who speaks three
Yeah.
languages, and they'll be their home base will be here, and then we go through our candidate pool, see if we have anyone in our candidate pool, and also reach out to other potential candidates, and find someone for that company. Um, it helps the companies a lot, because
Yeah.
the jobs platform helps companies because now the candidates are coming who are interested in the cannabis industry. And the other option is that candidate is just looking on Indeed for, let's say, a sales position, and they see 10,000 sales jobs. They might not ever even see the cannabis sales job.
Right.
So, even though the person is interested in the industry, they can't find it. The company is interested in this individual, but they're lost behind 10,000 other job posts for similar position. So, really, by having the industry specific job board, it really helps kind of connect the people. Like the tech industry has been doing it
Yeah.
for decades. You know, you have all these tech job boards. Now you have it for other things, for agriculture and things like that too, because it's just been shown time and time again that these industry or niche specific platforms really do help connect the right people with the right companies.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and especially I think right now people are going to look back on these days with fond memories. I'm really hopeful that whether it is the sheer amount of money that's about to pour into the industry, or it is the sheer volume of people that can be helped because of this industry, I really think that we're on the precipice of changing the laws, whether it's interstate commerce, which I hear is coming up soon, hopefully. And once the first dam begins to break, I really think you're going to see the stigma begin to evaporate and flood in there. So I think that laying the groundwork right now is a great way, especially over in Europe, because you're a conduit for people coming from different parts of the world. And like, hey, yeah, I know this company. Here's how the laws are over there. You really do a lot of the streamlining to help bring people up to speed.
Yeah, yeah, and so Germany is supposed to be passing their law today. So like I said earlier, and other countries are most of the countries in Europe are having discussions, some further along than others. But even just less than a year ago, France and Spain were saying we're not going to be looking at this. Now they're both looking at it, taking a serious look at it. Portugal was kind of slow rolling it all along, and now they're looking at it more closely. And there's a lot of other. Czech Republic has been kind of right along with Germany and really trying to push the full legalization, and now they've also stepped back a little bit when they saw the issues that Germany was having with the EU. But a lot of countries are looking at it in one fashion or another. Like you said, once the dam breaks, it looks like Germany's going to be that dam. Germany being the biggest economy in Europe,
Yeah.
of course, that's going to be a big driver anyway. But it's all the more reason why Germany is also being very careful about how they do it. First of all, Germany is always about following the rules correctly, and
Yep.
they don't want to do something that undermines the authority of the EU or the UN because they're big supporters of both of those, which is good. I agree with that. So eventually the EU and UN rules are going to have to be changed, but to get those to be changed is very difficult because then, for instance, in the EU, I believe it's 27 states or countries, they all have to agree or change these rules, and you're always going to have holdouts,
Right.
Especially some of the further eastern countries who are more conservative, that or because they want to use it as a political maneuver, like Hungary's been doing with,
Right.
Sweden getting into the EU or into NATO and things like that. Some countries will use these things that everyone is in agreement on as political, maneuvering. So, changing rules, the bigger rules, can be very difficult. But as you have medical cannabis and within the countries themselves, as things move along and the citizens start saying, we want this, eventually that groundswell of support is too much that the government can't ignore it anymore. They have to do something.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I talk to some of the people in the world of cannabis in the United States, there are some issues with it. Like some people, I remember not too long ago, there was this groundswell and, people that were cultivating were making tons of money, but then the bottom kind of drops out of it. And then you could buy it on the street for less. And, there's all this pressure happening that changes the game there. Are you seeing some of those? Is that the same game that happens in Europe? And maybe you could explain what the ground game is over there.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's all medical. So,
Right.
and medical in Europe is handled much differently than in the U.S. In the U.S., basically what you saw for medical was people would go get a bogus medical card from somewhere, and then they could walk into any dispensary. Here, you end up with a real prescription, which has to be filled out, every month or so, or every couple of months. Then you have to go to a true pharmacy and pick it up. And so it's really treated exactly like a medication.
Mm.
But in Germany, for at least, the insurance companies are also paying for it because of that.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's a big difference. Um, and so far, European countries, much more so than a lot of the recent states in the U.S., are really looking at it from a fairly honest point of view. It seems to me. Um, you don't have the politicians' brothers
Right.
getting the first licenses like you see a lot of these very
Yep.
Republican conservative states that have said we'll never allow cannabis. All of a sudden, they're all jumping on the bandwagon, passing laws.
Yeah.
Yet there's all kinds of shadiness on who gets these licenses going on, you know?
Yeah.
And there's lawsuits in so many states because of all these very questionable license, disbursements, I guess you would say. So I think it's being handled a lot more honestly here. Also, at least Germany has done some fact-finding trips to the U.S. to look at what's happening, what's working, what isn't. Um, so far, they're not talking about doing massive special taxes on cannabis above and beyond, which is what's been killing the industry in both the U.S. and Canada. It's one of the main problems. That, like you said, competition is driving down the profits, which is
Right.
normal in any industry.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's normal. It's not a big deal, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
if you need to be efficient, if you can't be efficient, then
Right.
you lose out. Um, but when you have to pay a 20-30% tax on top of all other taxes, I mean, that wipes out any profit. I mean, that's impossible. What other industry has ever been able to afford taxes like that? No one. I mean, maybe the oil industry could, but they get subsidies actually. I mean,
Right.
so they really could, but they get money given to them. So Germany and other countries here, from what I've seen, are not looking at doing those types of ridiculous taxes to, it's a money grab that doesn't really serve the economy in the long run.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I wish people could, and I think what may be the saving grace is what we talked about earlier. It's the true healing power of it. Like when you start seeing people no longer plagued by long-term pain, or you see them break an opiate addiction, like this tends to be things that can transform the way society works. Like if enough people begin to heal from something, it's like it almost becomes the wave that breaks over the pier, if that makes sense. Like, okay, look, this is ridiculous. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and almost everyone knows someone who
Yep.
has struggled with the addiction or had cancer or
Yeah.
chronic pain or mental health problems. I mean, these are all
Yeah.
things that are so common that, everyone knows someone. And a lot of times, one of those that I just mentioned is probably within the tighter family,
Yep.
even. And
Yep.
so that's where I think you're seeing a lot of this public support now, as more and more people are being exposed to people who they personally know who benefited from cannabis.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of support isn't because everyone thinks everyone should be running around smoking joints on every street corner. No, they're saying my grandmother had cancer and this helped her immensely in her last months. Or my friend has chronic pain from a work injury or from a bad accident or whatever, and this helps him greatly, and he doesn't have to take opiates anymore. I'm all for it. So these are the types of stories that make it very personal for people, but also change people's minds overnight. People can be 100% against it until that personal connection has benefited from it, and they see that it's not a bunch of stoners and drug addicts, but it's people that they consider good people who are being benefited.
Yeah, it's interesting to see our relationship with cannabis change. And just in my lifetime, like it used to be you'd buy a dime bag for $10. my uncle said he used to buy a dime bag for 10 cents, but in my day it was $10, and I guess that's inflation, but you buy it from some dude in the back alley, or you buy it from Jimmy at the party, or whatever, man. It was illegal, and so you would take your dime bag and you smoke it up with your friends in your Volkswagen van on the way to a Dead concert or the laser light show or something like that. But now you can go and you can see the terp pro. You could turn that bottle around and be like, oh, look at this terp profile right here. And I know people that are working with companies like 23andMe, not 23andMe, but companies like that to do genetic testing to try to figure out, hey, what's going on in here? And it just seems the same way I could pick up a bottle of beer and look at the back and see the calories. Now too, can I figure out, hey, it's not White Widow, it's this particular terp profile. It's cool to see this relationship changing on some level. That's happening worldwide, right? What do you think about this growing up sort of relationship change?
Well, that's one of the big things happening in Europe. I'll use Germany as an example because I'm most familiar with it here, of course. But Germany's government has said that the people in the government who are pushing the legalization have said we want to do two things: we want to protect children and get rid of the black market, and protect consumers in general also. But the two biggest points were getting rid of the black market and protecting children. The point being, the black market, it's illegal whether they sell it to a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 40-year-old.
Yeah.
So they don't care who they're selling it to. So in order to protect the children, you have to get rid of the black market. In order to get rid of the black market, prohibition doesn't work, so you have to legalize it in the end. That's the only option that you end up having, really. And so that's kind of the premise that they started from. But, the side effect of that also is just protecting consumers in general. If the 40-year-old or 20-year-old is going to be using cannabis anyway, they shouldn't have to buy it from Jimmy at the party or from the guy in the park who gets their weed from wherever, and it's covered in chemicals or not. Who knows what it's laced with? Maybe it's, now it's laced with fentanyl and people are ODing from fentanyl. Yeah. They thought they were just smoking a joint, and they're dying from a fentanyl overdose, which is crazy. So, that's the way you protect consumers, by having a clean product, and it's only clean if it's a regulated market. And then the side effect, long-term, not the long-term, but a bigger side effect of that is then you end up with the products, like you said, where it doesn't just say 22% THC and 3% CBD. It tells you the terpenes and everything else, and really allows people to become educated consumers, and then they can figure out what works for their particular needs and what doesn't. One person who's using it for anxiety is going to want something different from the person who's using it for their narcolepsy. They're two opposite. You wouldn't expect it to be the same medication, for each. So that's a big side effect or benefit. Let's call it benefit, not a side effect. Big benefit of the regulated or legal market is that consumers get a clean product and can see exactly what they're getting and can make informed decisions.
Yeah, I love that. On some level, I think because there are the effects can be different to different people. In the US, we have this weird thing where you can watch television and then see a drug commercial, and they're like, you should ask your doctor about this magic pill. And on some way, they just take all the accountability and they take all the critical thinking out of the decision making and then hand it to people. If you're going to get, if you're able to self-diagnose yourself with what, I get really nervous when I'm with people, and I go out in these places and I don't have a good time because I'm so worried about people thinking about me, that I wear the right shirt. Is that girl smiling at me? Is that guy want to fight me? Your brain is just going ballistic and you know it. And all of a sudden you find you can look at the back of this product and understand the terp profile. Now, all of a sudden, you're kind of taking back your authority. Okay, this particular profile works good for me with my stuff here. And on some level, I think that responsible use is a way for people to take back a little bit of their authority with a relationship with substances. And I think it does that in a way. It's like, hey, here it is. You're an adult. It doesn't take that much to start looking. It does take a little courage to self-experiment a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you do it in a responsible way. I think it's a win-win, man. I hope more people will do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different ways to look at that. I mean,
Okay.
I agree with you to a certain degree, though,
Okay.
because right now a lot of people self-medicate with alcohol,
Yes.
for the things that
Yeah,
you're
it's true.
describing, or other drugs, and certainly people like you also mentioned before self-medicate with cannabis, um, and giving them the tool if that's what they're going to do, where they can see, read, and first of all have the information that they can look up on the internet and say, oh, these terpenes I think would help me with the issue I have, whether it's anxiety or sleep or whatever else.
Yeah.
And then they can actually try and experiment along those lines. But I mean, really, ideally, they would be able to go to someone who's trained, has some type of
Mm,
mental health or medical training, and speak with them and say, "Here are my issues," and then
right.
that person with more advanced training could then work with them to figure it out instead of them just going to the dispensary and talking to a bud tender who really knows nothing about mental health, except for maybe their own issues and what helps them. But that's not really where good advice should be coming from. So, I mean, I'm glad that the information is there now, but it's not really the safest route either. But I mean, it's better than them just smoking random weed from the park. And sometimes it makes them feel better. Other times it makes them suicidal because they have no idea what they're getting. And each time it's from a different place. So, I mean, in that case, knowledge is definitely power.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe there should be a craft bud place where if you want to buy this strain, you have to show me that you've read the Portable Young first. You know, have you read Brave New World? Because you can only buy Brave New World weed if you read the book. Oh, there's a
Yeah.
quiz. I would go to that place, man. That's pretty
Yeah.
funny.
I mean, it's interesting. I haven't seen it, but I wonder if there are people out there who are doing that. If they're mental health experts or, who are uh, offering those types of services. I have no idea. I mean, I'm not in the U.S. anymore. Haven't been for a number of years, so I wouldn't know because that's not something that would be that common in knowledge. But seems like that would be like a little,
Yeah,
you know, cottage industry that would slowly build up. It's
yeah.
also difficult from a medical legal point of view too. Who knows? But yeah.
Yeah, now we're talking like that. There could be some fascinating surveys that could take place, that kind of straddle that line a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. On a similar note, here in Hawaii, like we got a few licenses for people. If you know somebody, like the brother, it's the same thing. The politician's brother gets the license or whatever, but
Right.
on some level, a positive note that I have seen is that because the black market is so connected and they're so well polished, some of the people are like, look, man, time to bring you guys out of the shadows. You guys are the best people here. You thoroughly understand cultivating. You already have a network. Why don't we bring you guys up? You guys get a license, and on some level, I think that's a positive thing, like legitimizing this area and kind of bringing these people up. Like, look, man, you're already a national business. Why not just do it in the light, And on some level, that can be a good effect, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can see both sides of
Okay.
of the coin a little bit. I think a lot of times the government says no one who was involved in the illicit market is going to be allowed in the legal market because you are doing things illegally. I mean,
Hmm.
I get their point,
Right.
but I mean, the way I would look at it is like you said. They know the industry.
Yeah.
I would say if you can safely say that they were not involved in violent crime related to this,
Right. I like that.
you know, then let them get a license as long as they can show that they're going to do it legally from now on. But most people who are growing cannabis are not involved in violent crime. So, but certainly some people who are higher or into bigger networks or
Sure.
whatever are. I mean, if people are involved in violent crime stuff, I don't think they should be allowed into the legal market personally.
Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, give these people the opportunity to become legitimate, and that's actually that's a better way to get rid of the black market is to buy
Yeah.
it out,
Right.
basically.
Right.
I mean, if you tell all the black market people you can't become legitimate, well, what are they going to do? They're just going to keep doing the black market. They're not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to become uh, I'm going to become a teacher now, or I'm going to become a cab driver now." I mean,
Yeah.
no, they're just going to continue doing what they know, which is
Yep.
selling weed on the black market.
Yep.
So um, to me, it's the best strategy.
Yeah.
Is incorporate them in. Of course, some people will come in and replace them in the black market,
Of
but
course.
um, if you if you don't give them an opportunity to get out of the black market, they're definitely staying. So,
Yeah. 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 It's interesting to think about how much innovation happens in that particular market, and I'm not talking about, I think everybody listening here is against the idea of violent crimes or, selling into abuse and this kind of stuff like that. But there's a lot of innovation that happens with the guy that is been growing, maybe he's a closet grower or something like that. And this guy's got this new strategy with soilless mediums. You know what I mean? Like that's the guy that might have some insight on about that might have the next new thing out there, man.
yeah. I mean, and all these strains, the thousands of strains that are out
Yeah.
there now. I mean, they were all created in the illicit market.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it all came from. So, you can't discount the illicit market because otherwise there would be nothing around today at all. Um, yeah. So, and strains, the different strains is what's important, and to treat the different conditions and to try and reach the different people who need it. It's one of the things you're seeing a lot here in Europe is that a lot of companies are breeding with their eye on specific conditions and are trying to find strains that match certain medical conditions and are actually doing medical studies to see what works and what doesn't. Um, so it's quite interesting to
Yeah.
see that happening. You know.
Yeah. Are you familiar with any studies with THC and blood type? I think I don't, I'm just spitballing here, but my personal opinion is there's something to do with blood type.
I haven't seen any studies. I've heard something about that concept before.
Really? Okay.
I I heard something about that before. Yes. But I think it's probably not as much related to
Yeah.
blood type as, like you mentioned earlier, 23andMe for
Yeah.
genetic testing. So I used to actually be involved with some genetic testing companies.
Mm.
And what they developed a number of years ago was genetic tests where you could actually do a genetic test to see what medications would be effective for you and which wouldn't. Uh,
Mm.
One particular panel that was interesting was the one for antidepressants, because for antidepressants, a lot of people they have to try 3 or 4 or 5 different ones
Right.
before they find one that works, and each one you're on for 4 to 6 months before you give up on. You're supposed to be on it for 6 months. So I mean, imagine if it's going to take five medications before you find the right one. That's 2.5 years before you found
Yeah.
medication that's going to work for you. And in that time, most people give up
Yep.
on these medications. So it's not very effective. So this blood test would say, well, based on your genetics, these medications are more likely to work for you. These are not.
Yeah.
And so the same as that works for all types of different medications. Um, it could also be applied to different terpenes and things like that.
Yeah.
But first, we'd have to understand more about the terpenes and how they work in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's that basic research that a lot of that is missing to, I think, to make that leap to where you can use genetics to figure out which strain would be good for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. It's a great selling point if you can come up with the literature to back it up. It's could be game changing if
Yeah.
if you can figure out that missing link. Well, there's a lot of talk these days about the cannabinoid system, and it's this system that has been ignored for so long, and nobody knows a whole lot about it. But it too is mysterious in some ways. Like, we don't really thoroughly understand how, does it work with psychedelics, or is it I don't know anything about it. Man, maybe you could speak to this mysterious system that seems to hold the key to a lot of problems. What's your take on it?
Well, like you mentioned, it was mysterious for a long time, but now just in the last few years in particular, I mean, there's been research has been done on it for a very long time, since probably the 70s, I think, 60s or 70s, when they first discovered it and were really looking at it. But now in the last 10, 15 years, with things changing in the US on the state level, more and more research has been happening into this very basic science, but it's very complicated. Basic as far as getting the groundwork for understanding things, and their science is beginning to really understand a lot better and making new discoveries. I don't remember what it was, but they just recently came out with a paper about some new discoveries in the endocannabinoid system. God, I can't remember what that was now off the top of my head. But yeah, point being, they're still making basically new discoveries and understanding what all is involved and how it all interacts. Like I said before, though, with terpenes and so many different substances or active components in cannabis, how does that all interact is, in my mind, just, I think, a little bit too complicated for us to be able to really be able to explain precisely.
Yeah, it's fun to look at, and it's fun to imagine what the possibilities are. And sometimes I think that's a big part of it is I forgot who said the quote, but life is only stranger than you imagine. It's stranger than you can imagine, And
Yeah.
when I started thinking about the possibilities that we can learn in medicine and science, and it's interesting. I know over here in the US that there was a wave of venture capital that kind of flowed into the world of cannabis for a while. Is that something that's flowing into the world of cannabis over there?
Well, I mean, a few years ago, you probably noticed it 2 years ago, when the Ukraine was invaded, and then that brought on energy crisis in Europe, and then inflation, and that kind of, the fear spread around the world, and investment dried up around the world in cannabis, but also in almost everything.
Yeah.
But that was also, the North American cannabis markets have been having hard times for a number of years now too. So I think all of that came together to kind of slow down the investments in Europe. Plus, there is a lot of enthusiasm about things happening in Europe, and then things slowed down, especially in Germany. Germany came out and said, we're going to do full legalization within 2 years and all these things. And that kept getting rolled back. And now, hopefully in a few hours, we'll have the first law passed and be moving forward at a much more slow pace, but still moving forward. But now you're starting to see, now that Germany is moving forward, and also all these other countries are starting to move forward, at different levels and different paces, but it's all moving forward slowly. You're starting to see a lot more interest in investments in Europe again. And it's in particular coming from the US, from within Europe, but also from the US. I know several investment funds that are US based that are now looking at investing heavily in Europe in the next year or two. So definitely, I think in the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot of investment here. A lot of that depends on the laws that are changing. Germany currently only allows 3 or 4 companies to cultivate within Germany. They're talking about opening that completely up, and allowing anyone who can qualify for a license, to cultivate here, which would bring in a ton of investment. So there's a lot of things that, even small changes in laws can bring big investments in because it opens up a lot of opportunity. Um, yeah, next few years I think is going to be very exciting in Europe with the laws changing, the investments coming in. Um, and as things change, then people want more change,
Yeah.
and so you'll start to see more uh, citizens, but also companies and influential people pushing for change. So it's going to be very interesting the next few years for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know that in Vietnam, you spoke a little bit about going over there and working on craft beers. I can't help but think about the echoes of prohibition from the past and how this thing was illegal, but then it was made legal. And then you fast forward and there's these craft beers. And like on some, I can't help but see the symmetry with legal cannabis on some level. It's facing the prohibition now. But in my mind, I can think of 20 different people I know that would be perfect craft vendors and have their own brand and stuff like that. Is that something that you think about from time to time, or you see the echoes of that, or what are is that a trend?
Oh,
What's your take on that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned prohibition of alcohol in the U.S. I mean, most
Yeah.
of the major crime families and crime syndicates in the U.S. came from prohibition.
Hello, Kennedys.
Yeah, but Al Capone and all these the old gangsters,
Yeah.
they they were all just involved in alcohol and almost nothing. Then maybe loan sharking and stuff,
Yeah.
but they
Sure.
weren't really selling drugs, and not many drugs were around then anyway. But still, they were mainly alcohol, and they
Yep.
became billionaires or multimillionaires back in the day.
Yeah.
That started a lot of the crime families. And then the craft beer you mentioned, and you saw it already in the U.S. that you had first a lot of big players, and then you started seeing the craft or boutique cannabis growers coming up. And I think you'll see that happen. And then you saw it also with whiskeys and vodkas
Yeah.
are all craft
Yep.
now too. I think you're going to see that happen in Europe a lot faster. I think
Ah,
you'll see a lot of craft um, cannabis uh, once there's recreational. I think you'll see a lot of craft cannabis sprout up pretty quickly. No pun intended.
yeah.
Sorry. Um,
Well
no,
done.
but I think you will see that happen just because I think a lot of things follow the U.S. You have craft beer here, you have for a while, but you're starting to see more craft distilleries and things also. So I think the whole craft concept is just a concept that is going to follow a lot of industries anyway. And I think you'll definitely see that here with the cannabis, which is good because that allows people who with a passion for a good product and for doing something small, but it costs more, but it's a better product, but it's more expensive. But you will find the people who can buy it. It's just not going to be for the mass market. Just like there are people who want the Mercedes or the Ferrari,
Yeah.
and not just the Kia. I drive a Kia, but so
Yeah.
nothing
Well,
bad with
sure.
Kias. I have one, but
Yeah.
other people don't want a Kia. They only want something that's bigger and nicer. And same, and if they can afford it, that's great. Same with cannabis. Not everyone can afford the cannabis that costs twice as much, but some people can, and they'll gladly pay it to support that small grower, but also because they feel like it's a better product.
That's a great point. Perceived value. And it's interesting to think how much of a product it can be. I was talking with a friend of mine, an old school grower from California that moved to Hawaii. We got an interesting discussion about soilless mediums, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a big fan. My friend Paul, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. Uh, we were talking about soilless mediums, and he threw this giant wrench in the game. He goes, "Listen, George, anything that's not grown outdoors is dog shit, man. It's not grown. If it's a soilless medium, it's garbage." And I started thinking about that, like, man, there should really be like a discussion about that. Like, I could see a bunch of craft growers coming around us a topic like that and being just back and forth and hashing this stuff out. And on some level, when I asked him why, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Listen, man, do you realize like everything that's grown indoors is done because of to make it safe and away from pesticides, but also what you're doing is you're taking it away from the very nutrients that brings out the full effect of that particular strain." And his story that really sunk in for me was that as a guy from California who used to grow and have everything indoors, he would focus strictly on THC content and be like, okay, this is it. And when he finally moved out to Hawaii and bought this farm, he started hanging out with some guys out here, and he would do the weed out here, and he'd be like, this is weak. But then it would hit his whole body. He goes, it hit me like, yeah, like the THC is definitely not the content, but there's way more than the THC. My whole body is tingling from this particular stuff. And so has this theory that, the soil is a genuine huge part of the process to help people heal. Well, I know it's kind of controversial, kind of way out there, but what do you think about that as a particular debate topic on a future podcast for me?
I mean, I think it's interesting, but I have 2 points. I mean, I think one is, I don't know if it helps you heal better, but I agree. I mean, I think every input into that plant is going to contribute to that final flower,
right?
And certainly if you're growing at a certain elevation with certain air and certain soil, that's going to be unique compared to growing somewhere else. I mean, compared to grapes, certain grapes.
There you go. Yes.
Certain wines are known, and supposedly wine connoisseurs can taste where these grapes come from based on, what's in that soil, the metals and the nutrients and the whatevers, in the microbes, everything that's specific to that area. So I think, certainly that's going to have a big effect on that final product.
Yeah.
But if you look at, like, once again, using Germany as an example, in Germany, you have to basically grow currently for medical cannabis indoors, and ideally hydroponically, because in Germany, let's say you bring a product to market, let's say it's call it White Widow with 22% THC, then that's going to be registered as White Widow 22%. After that product is registered, which takes a while and is a process, now it's legal. But every subsequent batch that comes into the market with that name has to be within 10% THC value of that original one.
Wow.
So let's make it easier. Call it, with a White Widow 20%. That means all batches forevermore have to be between 18 and 22.2%.
Wow.
You can't get that growing outdoors. Sometimes you have more rain, sometimes more sun, sometimes this, sometimes that. Your batch is different each time. It's different from the top of the plant to the bottom of the plant, the THC level and everything else, and from one side of your plant of your grow to the other side. So in order to meet those strict guidelines, or not guidelines, requirements for the German market, for the medical market currently, you pretty much have to grow indoors hydroponically with artificial light and so on, to where you can really control all the factors to get that close. I'm sure there's going to be growers out there who disagree, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not a grower. I'm to be proven wrong, but my understanding is that in order to guarantee you can get that close, you need to really do it under extremely controlled circumstances or conditions. And the thing is, if that batch doesn't meet your requirements, you can't just turn around and do something else with it. It has to be destroyed. So there goes your whole batch, 3 months of work, 3-4 months of work, all in the trash. I mean, that's not a sustainable business model to just grow batch after batch outdoors and pray that it's going to always be the same, because it's not going to be. But that's where hopefully recreational market will be different and have different tolerances. Because why should it have to be that close? In a recreational market, it should just match what's on your label. And each time you print a new label based on your most recent COA, and that should be fine. Hopefully, but for a medical market, which I can understand, it's supposed to be a medication. It should be very close to the same each time until you get the same effect. But so for the medical market here, you can't just grow outdoors, but that's where the craft market and recreational market comes in.
Man, it's so intricate. we almost need another classification. It I don't know any. In some ways, it's almost like the difference between when you try to get it like that high. It's almost like the difference between chewing coca leaves and doing cocaine. Like, well, why do you need it that high? Like, gee, just take it easy. It doesn't happen like that in nature. Like, why do
Right.
you need it that high? Like, it seems to me on some level. And you know who you should talk to? You should talk to. I'll hook you up with this guy, Sebastian Marincolo. The guy's a genius. And he's recently wrote this book called Elevated: Cannabis as a Tool for Mind Enhancement. And him and I were having a conversation not too long ago where he actually made the parallel between different types of cannabis and grapes. And he went on this long, really informative thought storm where he was saying, like, so many people, George, like, you wouldn't keep a bottle of wine out on your table in the sun for like a month and then drink it. It would be bad. It's not gonna be right. It's not gonna do the same thing for you. Like, there's a whole thing that's happened with the relationship of it. And he goes, so many people do that with cannabis. They just leave it out and like expect it to still be good. And he goes, in his opinion, like, that's what leads to a little bit of like the greening out or the psychosis type elements of poor thoughts. Is like, yeah, because you got the wrong stuff. You let your stuff go bad. And we just don't know enough when it comes to like super high content. Like, maybe we're making stuff, maybe something that high is the wrong amount to make you work with anxiety or something like that. But it's an interesting concept, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's the market in the U.S. has pushed it, and
Right.
you're
Yep.
seeing it in Germany, in Europe also. Is that the consumers want higher THC? Um, I think part of it is, the consumer thinks, well, if I'm paying 20
Yeah.
euros for a gram, I want as much THC out of it as I can get it. Kind of like, when you're in high school and you're drinking and you want the high alcohol content. Um, so but in the end, it doesn't really work that way. You know,
No, not at all.
if you're just trying to get high as hell, then yeah, then that's the way it works. But if you're trying to take care of your pain or your mental health issues or whatever it is, high THC does not necessarily equal better. And there have been studies that have shown
Yeah.
that actually a more balanced CBD to THC profile is better for most conditions. But that most consumers don't realize that. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of education that needs to be done for consumers, for people in the industry, for physicians, for everyone. For politicians, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know in Canada, like, there's certain laws about advertising because you can get into it's like putting candy at eye level for kids. You know what I mean? Like, somehow they can do that, but you're not allowed to advertise for certain things. It's so maddening. But you know, when the advertising for medical marijuana is done by Snoop Dogg in a rap song that just talks about tearing it back so much. Like, it's the wrong message, man. Like, it's the wrong message. It should definitely be. And I think that I think there's a real opportunity here for people that are bringing products to market to work hand in hand with the science community and the medical community. Like, listen, the model of us trying to hit this high THC count is a problem. We should find other markers to do that because, in some ways you're weeding out the people. You're right. Like, not everyone has the resources to grow year round without pesticide, without any of these things. Like, they exclude so many people. It's almost like that high THC content is a barrier for entry. And that
Mhm.
allows only certain people to play the game. But they're playing a false game because that's not even the effects that you want. Like, it's so much better to have these different levels. And I think that would open it up to so much more people. But I know it's complicated and it's intricate, but man, I think there's an opportunity for people listening to this. Like, there's a real opportunity to craft a better message that will benefit everybody on some level. Don't you think there is? Or am I just speaking
Yeah,
crazy
yeah.
here?
Absolutely. That's why I was just saying that about the education part.
Yeah.
That comes down to by education. That sounds almost too uh, school oriented, but by education, just getting the
Yeah.
information and knowledge out to people.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that everyone needs to go and sit for an hour long course 5 days a week for a month, but
Right.
it can be as simple as pamphlets at the dispensaries in the U.S., which give you some information about why THC level is not the only thing to look at.
Yeah.
Having bud tenders, for whatever courses are required for them in different states. Have part of that being that they discuss with their customers that they should look at things like terpenes and CBD and the other lesser cannabinoids, and not just THC level. And
Yeah.
that um, you can have a much better experience, even if you are just trying to get high recreationally. You can have a better experience with a lower THC, but a better terpene profile, than going for the 25%er that makes you just want to curl up and die potentially.
Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating to think about. Yeah, Dr. And I love our conversation, man. This has been really, really fun. And I really enjoy getting to bounce ideas off people and have a conversation with about things I'm passionate about, especially with what you got going on over there with what's the name of the company again? EU Canada Jobs.
EU Canada Jobs, yeah.
EU Canada Jobs.
Yep.
Maybe before we land the plane, maybe we could shift back into that a little bit. Like I want people to not only understand exactly how to get involved with you over there, or if they're interested about it, but like I want people to see that this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about education. Not only are we talking about maybe the high THC count is important, but maybe this whole industry popping up, is a way adults and people that are interested in it now, or maybe there's a guy that really knows how to grow. Like, what is the appetite over there for growth? I mean, if there's somebody interested in Hawaii or something like that, do they have a good chance at like getting hired on at a job over there, or what is there a qualification process? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, right now there's a lot is still up in the air as far as what's going to be coming down the road. But
Right.
Currently there's already at least 1,500 companies in across Europe, and probably double that,
Wow.
who are directly involved in the industry. And you've got growers, but growers are cultivation companies are just a small part of that.
Right.
Distributors and all these other companies
Yeah.
are and processors, extractors, and everything that goes along with it is
Yeah.
involved. So there's all types of jobs. The three biggest job categories currently are sales, marketing, and IT positions, just like in every industry.
Yep.
Growers, there are occasionally people looking for growers, and we've talked to a lot of people who are growers who'd like to come over. So there's opportunities for every single category or type of job, I would say. As far as people coming from the U.S., Canada, other places, it's happening on a regular basis. There's
Yeah.
value in people having experience in the industry. Obviously, a grower has to have
Of
if
course.
you're a head grower, you have to have cannabis experience. But even other types of people, sales in particular, even if sales are different in the U.S. and Canada, it's still that cannabis knowledge is very valuable. But you don't have to have cannabis knowledge. It's a
Yeah.
relatively new industry in Europe. I mean, it's been legal for 7 years in Germany now, almost, and some other countries about as long also, but very small and growing. So um, companies don't expect that everyone who comes in has cannabis background. Um, but of course, it's nice when they do. So getting into Europe is not always the easiest for a work visa, but coming from North America, it's relatively easy, at least to come and visit. And then if you are someone with a higher degree or a special skill set, then companies, if they want, they can apply for visas for you and typically get them. Um, they have to be able to demonstrate why or explain why this person coming from outside of Europe deserves a job instead of someone within Europe. But like I said, higher degrees and specialization usually, is a good enough argument. Um, so anyone who's in North America who's interested in looking, if they can reach out to us and we can,
Yeah.
help them look, and probably can help them find something. Yeah.
I know that here in the U.S., like sometimes there's conventions, or they just had the big psychedelic event in Denver. Is there something like that for cannabis in Europe? Is there like a circuit where people are kind of coming around and building momentum and stuff like that?
Yeah, actually, the three biggest are the biggest one is Cannabis, which is in Barcelona,
Okay.
and that's coming up in a few weeks here. It's mid March, and we'll be there with a booth.
Nice.
Um, and they have about 70,000 visitors, and they have been going on for it's like 20 years or something. 20, 25 years. It's huge. I mean, 70,000 people, that's as big as Burning Man, Um, so that is, that's a really big one.
Yeah.
And then in June is Mary Jane in Berlin, and they expect about 50,000 visitors this year. And then CannaFest is the other really big one. That's also, I think, around 50,000 people,
Wow.
and that's in Prague towards the end of the year. I think early November, if I remember correctly. So those are the three biggest. But you've got tons of smaller events. Some are more geared to hemp, some are more towards CBD, but there's always some crossover between those anyway. And then you also have a lot of business to business events, which are also tend to be smaller. But especially now, kind of now is when event season, conference season starts to kick off again, and there's stuff, a couple of events every month, if not more, every month.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. If people are interested in cannabis, and whether you're working in North America, South America, there'll probably be some pretty great advice to go over there and start checking out some of these events. Or if they're interested in finding a job through EU Canna, it would be a great place to come over and shake your hand and
Yeah,
look you in the
absolutely.
eye, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, Barcelona is a wonderful city. It doesn't hurt. It's not a bad excuse to go visit Barcelona. Maybe
Yep.
uh, you know, look at Spain a little bit more, or go down to Lisbon, where there's a lot of stuff happening there for cultivation, or wherever else you want in Europe. But Barcelona is great. It's right on the water, and it's a great event. Or Berlin is an amazing city. It's my favorite city on the planet. Come here and check out the city and spend a few days at Mary Jane. It's also, or Prague with Cannafest. I mean, Prague's also an amazing city. So you can't go wrong at any of these events. Beautiful city, nice trip to Europe, and get a good event in, and probably make some really good connections.
What if somebody was interested in talking to you directly, or they're like, "Hey, man, I want to check out this EU Canna thing over here. I got a company. I need some people, or I want to list over there." How do they get a hold of you, man? Can people reach out to you and you'll talk to them, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, probably the easiest way is just to find us on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
and just look for EU Canada jobs on LinkedIn, or they can look for me directly, Andy Mansfeld, with the two N's. So people are free to reach out to me directly or to the company on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, Andy, this has been awesome. I really enjoy it. We got to have you come back. It would be cool to maybe if you upcoming, we can do some live events together, have more people come in, have a bit more of a discussion. And it's just a cool topic, and I enjoy talking about it. I know you're passionate about it. So in the future,
Yeah,
we can have some more stuff. That'd be fun.
yeah, yeah. I would love that. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So one
Okay.
more time before I let you go, EU Canada, maybe you could just give one more name of the shout out the website, the name, and where people can find you one more time before I let you go.
Okay, yeah. So it's EU Canada Jobs, and you can find us on LinkedIn, EU Canada Jobs, or also you can look for me directly. And the website is just www.eucanadajobs.com. And also,
Fantastic.
you can also just Google EU Canada Jobs. you'll find us, or even just Google cannabis jobs in Europe, and we usually pop up as at the top of the search results for that, for just a generic search also.
Perfect. And go down to the show notes because all the links will be down there as well. We'll hang on briefly afterwards. I'll talk to you just briefly afterwards. But
Okay.
everybody, I hope you have a beautiful weekend. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Shout out to my friend Griggs and everybody else who was talking out there. Paul, Griggs, Anthony, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I hope you have a beautiful day. That's all we got. Aloha.